So today we're going to be talking about how I actually divide up roles and how I look at things when I'm building a party from scratch. And this may go into some weird tangents along the way. You're just going to need to be cool with that, and I think a lot of the people that subscribe to me, majority of my viewers are not subscribed, enjoy those types of tangents where I go off about the game and I just kind of knowledge dump about different things and provide different ways of thinking about stuff. So, with that, I wanted to find party roles and how you fill these party roles. But more so than the party roles, I want to describe the types of scenarios each role solves, because that's fundamentally what the game is. It is a series of problems that you then solve. And this goes in combat, out of combat. You can kind of define a lot of things as the problem, and then the types of things you can do to solve it. Everything in this game has more than one solution. So when building a party, it's good to be able to solve all the different kinds of problems, rather than over-investing into solving a specific thing. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started by talking about different party roles. And so this is how I defined roles in the past. And I think this list is fine, but you can also clearly see that I made this list in about, 15 minutes before recording a video. So this is the list I use to think of things now, partially because my opinions changed in the past, months. I just thought about it more heavily now. So this are the 4 categories I would split things into, and I think all 4 of these categories are important. And they each refer to different types of issues that they solve. So offense is the issues of how do we get them dead, and this will go over how valuable are different ways of doing damage. Defense will be all of your tanking, all of your healing. All those types of abilities will be under this category, and so I'll talk about the value of each of those. Special category is stuff that I think you should really be going for, but doesn't fit cleanly into offense or defense, but usually is still in combat stuff. Then pure out-of-combat utility, which is still a part of the game and is still very impactful, and is something you should prioritize even heavier if you're playing in Pathfinder Society, due to how prevalent skill checks are in those adventure paths. So with that, let's start in the offense category, because I think this is the one where you can start to see my philosophy the most. And when people talk about optimizing for offenses in Pathfinder, or really any game, the first thing you often hear about is damage per round or damage per second type measurement. And these can be pretty useful. It tells you how much damage your character is expected to do over a long enough duration. So in an average world, you will do this much damage. And so that seems like a very, very good measurement, but there are a lot of holes in it. And I think the easiest way for me to explain those holes is to talk about why other metrics matter. Because, DPRs usually talk about single target, but that's really only good when you're trying to just deal damage over a long period to a single target, like in a boss fight. But if you have a bunch of tiny enemies, then casting a single fireball that hits all of them for a good amount of damage suddenly spikes your damage up way higher very early in the fight, lets a few of them die off before they even get a turn initiative, thus making the rest of the fight easier. Your healer now doesn't need to actually heal, so they're also outputting damage, and you snowball really hard. And that is the power of burst damage. This usually costs a resource or has some other limiting factor, but it lets you do even more damage than a base damage per round type build. And so spell slots and things like Fireball are one of the prime examples of doing this. And if you want a class that's built around just doing as much burst damage as possible, that's where something like the Magus or the Psychic comes in, as they have abilities that boost their damage really high for a specific round. Either Spell Strike or Unleash Psyche. That's where they come in the most handy. But let's say you have burst damage but isn't area, like that Magus Spell Strike. Well, now you're not able to hit down all the mooks at once, and you're not talking about removing a bunch of creatures from initiative. So that's better against a fight with several on-level creatures where you can quickly use your burst damage, get rid of one of them, and now the fight is very easy, and your tanking abilities, your healing, can easily keep up with the damage of the remaining creature. Because, most fights are rigged slightly in the player's favor because, well, that's how the encounter building math works. If it wasn't rigged in the player's favor, every single encounter would be extreme. So, burst damage lets you get to the point where you can snowball hard faster, and thus lets you end those fights faster and easier and burn less resources overall than if you only focused on DPR and just did damage. That snowball would get rolling a lot slower. So burst can get you into the fun zone where you're not needing to worry about healing as much. DPR closes the door entirely. That's usually how these things go. Now, mind you, I don't think damage is the best thing to do in boss fights, but that'll be gone over in the special category. Now, there's also the note of damage types in offense, but that really only matters for specific creatures, so it really can fall under the special category in silver bullets, so it can targeting different defenses. That is all a category that I'm going to store for later. So, why don't we talk about defenses real quick? Because you can really think of defense as the healing category that tanks also happen to fall into. Because tanking is not very emphasized in Pathfinder 2e. Currently in the game, we have one class that truly mitigates damage for others, being the champion, and particularly the holy to neutral champions that give others a resistance to all damage. And, well, I guess the funny tree called Timber Sentinel is also a very strong tanking ability. And that is like proactive healing. It makes that nobody gets in the danger zone, so you can keep on outputting damage for longer. It gives you more rounds to do the DP of the DPR. That's the goal of a champion, where healing can do a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different reasons you'd want healing. And I'm going to mostly separate it into 3 types. One type is repeatable out-of-combat healing, so that you can enter fights at full health, so that you don't get reverse snowballed from somebody getting knocked out because you couldn't be at full health walking to a fight and they happen to get a lucky crit. That can have stuff start going bad really easily, and then the other side use the mechanics I mentioned earlier in the offense section to then make sure they are winning that fight. Because Pathfinder 2 is a snowball-y game once people start going down. So being at full health walking into fights is a big deal and increases your success chance, I think is the best way to put it. And so there are many ways to do that. Watch my video on healing. The big ones are treat wounds, focus spells, or having kineticists that can heal people. That's usually the big ways to do out-of-combat healing. There's also stabilizing people, making sure they don't die, because when somebody's dying, they might die. And if somebody dies, it can be a pain in the butt to resurrect them, if not outright impossible, as all of the resurrection-type rituals are uncommon, meaning you need to ask your GM for permission to get those, and some GMs may say no resurrections as a part of the world building. I know I do. So, that's the thing if you ever play at my tables. If your character dies, oops. Anyway, being able to guarantee a small amount of healing to make sure somebody doesn't die and they get their actions back for being able to rejoin the fight is impactful. And that's really where stuff like battle medicine comes in. If you don't have medic or the investigator forensic medicine boosting the power of your battle medicines are just going to be that little bit of stabilization healing. That can top somebody up, but it's mostly for making sure that somebody doesn't die if they're on the ground, and they can pick up their weapons and participate in the fight a little bit more. That's really the goal of those small amounts of healing. Then, there are the big burst heals that you'd get from something like the heal spell that can bring somebody from very low health to near full health very quickly. And those are basically an undo button for the enemy's turn. Because if you're able to heal using less of your encounter budget, and I'm calling encounter budget as like the XP level of threat, a player character is worth about 40 XP of threat. The average encounter that's a severe has 120 XP. So if you're healing that much XP turn of threat, you are effectively giving your team a lot more time than output damage and get a ball rolling. So it can let you, in a fight that isn't going well, stall long enough for you to get that couple kills you needed to be able to start the snowball and roll over them. I think Cleric is the best at this because you have the largest quantity of heals, so you can stall out a fight the longest. That's my opinion though, other healers are still very valid. But that's where you'd want to get your burst healing. And if you're lacking any part of that healing metric, you're gonna struggle in those specific scenarios, because if you only have one healer who only has the big healing, then you're gonna be burning very important resources to just pick somebody off the ground when you'd have the fight normally, but you just need to make sure they don't die, which is inefficient use of resources and might cause you to take fewer fights per day. If you can't heal between combats, you're going to be taking fewer fights per day and you're not going to be as successful as a party. And if you cannot do those big burst healing, you're then praying to dice luck that your characters don't just die on you from the boss getting a lucky critical hit that you have no way to recover from. So all those types of healing are important. And in an average party, I'd recommend having one big burst healer and one minor stabilization healer. And of course, you can use a big burst healer as a stabilization healer, but the reason I say those should be on two different characters is healers can go down. And then you want to have your off healer be able to just quickly slap a battle medicine, Ocean's Balm them, whatever, get the main healer back up so they can heal themselves and you can get your stall engine back online. Because really, your healers are your life support for when things inevitably go poorly. An average campaign that lasts, let's say 20 levels of gameplay experience, and you have, let's say, 6 fights per level, that's 120 fights. Something will go horrendously wrong in at least one of those 120 fights. The defense engine is for making sure the snowball doesn't roll down the other side of the hill that causes you to lose. So the start of a fight is kind of a sumo match at the top of this hill where both parties are pushing the snowball on opposite sides and hoping that it rolls down the other team's area. But how do we make sure that our snowball goes the way we want? Because, in boss fights, you can't just burst down an entire boss fight. That's not feasible. That's not a reasonable solution. You can't do that with damage alone. And there are a lot of times where damage alone is not sufficient. And that's where I get into the special category. This is where casters really excel compared to marshals. And this is also where marshals can get wrestler to do all this stuff anyway. And I like to think of wrestlers as a type of Gish, because you do all the things in the special category on a marshal. But, I'm getting ahead of myself. What is in the special category exactly? It is action denial, buffs and debuffs of various types, as well as silver bullet effects. And so, let me go over what I mean by each of these. So, enemy action denial. Let's say you're in a boss fight. There's one boss enemy and you have 4 party members. Each of you have 3 actions apiece because that's the fundamental rules of how the game works, and we are just going to accept that as a given for now, no commenting that haste exists in the comments. And so, if you were to be able to, as one of the 4, trade action for action into the boss, you then have 11 actions versus 2 actions, and that makes the boss a lot less scary. And you can trade action for action in a very obvious and direct way with spells like Slow, or you can do it in a less obvious and direct way by doing things like tripping and grappling them, and giving them these status conditions they want to get out of. And well, they need to burn actions to get out of those, so you're trading action for action in a sense. And that's really the goal. Because if you can do that, you're then making it so the boss cannot fully unleash all their big offensive several action abilities, and they can't chain stuff together as easily. You're otherwise being a nuisance and making sure they cannot play the game at full efficiency, thus letting your team have a foothold to start pushing that snowball over the cliff. And with buffs and debuffs, you can actually manufacture a hill to get momentum on your snowball, because that's how I describe buffing and debuffing. Now, I'm sure that if you've gone this far in the video, you've heard the saying, every +1 matters, because it's true. every +1 does matter. It gives you a bonus to both hitting and critting. And in a scenario where you only hit on a 15 anyway, well, a +1 hitting on a 14, that's still increasing your damage by like 15%, okay? Like, a +1 is always very meaningful. So being able to set up something like a bless at the start of a boss fight and being able to manipulate the math of the game lets you basically gain momentum on that snowball to have it go down in a way that actually has you win and set up advantage in a boss fight that normally you can't do that with damage. Now, trading actions is bad if the enemy has more actions than you. If the enemy has 4 creatures for every one of your players, you never want to trade down in actions. You trading action for action with a mook is horrendous exchange. You should just kill them, execute them publicly in front of their family. That's the goal. But the point of the special activities is they are a way for you to twist the math in those hard fights. People frequently complain that boss fights are the hardest fights in this game, and I say, that's because you're underinvesting in the special category and overinvesting in offenses. Because offenses are the best way to deal with encounters of many creatures, where the special category is the best way to deal with encounters with a single dangerous creature, or creatures with specific dangerous abilities, cue silver bullets. Silver bullets are things that are very specific or inefficient, because you wouldn't make a bullet out of silver under any normal circumstance in the real world. Right? Right? Come on. You wouldn't. Get out of my comment section. So, there is one time you'd really want a silver bullet though, and that's if you're fighting a werewolf. And that's the rough idea. These are abilities that would normally be pretty inefficient, but in a niche scenario, they win you the game. They solve that encounter. They just win. And so, these can exist both in and out of combat, and being aware of them, especially as a spellcaster, will make you far better as a player and make your party more successful overall. So, let me give an example. A spell like Revealing Light can be fine as a debuff that gives your party plus 20% effective HP. That's still a pretty fair ability. But if an enemy creature is relying on invisibility, Revealing Light turns off their main mechanic for their fight and just lets you wail on them. Because that creature would have had power budget in that invisibility, which you just negate, and then you just get to have your way with them after that. So if you know your GM is going to use stuff like Invisible Stalkers, just have like a scroll of Revealing Light on your tool belt so you can use an action, draw it, cast it. Oh look, this weird niche mechanic that we'd otherwise struggle to deal with, that marshals need to invest in 8th level feat called blind fighting to deal with. Oh, I give my entire party blind fight because I spent 12 gold on a scroll. That is the power of a silver bullet. Another example, something like Laughing Fit or Roaring Applause. These spells turn off enemy reactions even on a successful save. And against some enemies, like a Hydra, that have 5 reactions, starting at like level whatever, very low level for having that many reactions with reach reactive strikes, being able to disable all of its reactive strikes with a single spell slot, even on a successful save, is so massively game-changing into that type of enemy. And powerful reactions only get more common as you level. So I'd say if your party does not have a way to turn off reactions, you will struggle late game, because there are a lot of hyper nasty reactions in those later game fights. Out of combat, some examples of silver bullet spells would be things like Translate. If you're in a ruins and there's a language you cannot read, you just cast Translate, now you can read it, you do your business, you learn the information, and you move on. It solves the issue of language barriers. And at 4th rank, it lets you solve language barriers for an entire room of diplomats. These niche spells that do something really powerful are more valuable than you think. And you should look into getting these, particularly as you start reaching these higher levels and you don't have stuff to put in your lower level slots. Because, you know, you could put something like Sure Strike in there, but if you don't have any great attack roll abilities, so you're just using it with cantrips, it's not actually that good. It's just kind of mid, always, and competes with demoralize and like other things you could be doing. But now let's say instead of prepping like a sure strike in that first level, you prep a create water. So in a scenario where there is a fire elemental, you can create water and have it be a very valuable effect from a very low level spell slot. From second rank spells, that's where you get your revealing lights. That's where you get your laughing fits. That's where you put all these weird utility spells in. After they stop being in your top 30% of spell slots, it should just be mono utility and mono silver bullets from that point down. Because, you know, I think it's better for those types of resources to be bad usually, but occasionally super excellent. Because as a caster, you always have like 25 spells competing for your actives, and your cantrips are always going to be a mediocre go-to option, so you don't need more of those. Get some things that'll be truly exceptional when you need them. That's my advice. And if you have a lot of casters playing in that way, you'll notice that the game starts to feel a lot easier, and casters start to feel like the dominant character type instead of martials. And I mean that. And then let's go into out of combat, because this is really where most skills get involved. And I'd recommend that every party tries to have every skill trained on at least one character, at a minimum. And if you want to have a variety of people be good at different skills, try to build your characters so that you utilize different key ability scores, or different ability scores that are high. So like if we have a cleric that's getting high wisdom, and a fighter that's having high strength, I might not want to get a champion that has high strength, and instead look towards something like, let's say, an investigator as the second martial, and go for something more int and dex based to cover different skills. And that's really where I'd look to cover skill gaps, is I'd look to see what key ability scores do we have, what class can I fit in that fills niches from the other boxes while giving us some skills that we need. Because it's really difficult for me to talk about skills and how useful they will be, because that changes so much campaign to campaign. I have a video on like how valuable I think skills are. My opinions have changed. Like they changed as I was editing that video, so I disagreed with some of my own takes on that one, but I still think it's a great resource, and it's mostly for the discussion rather than the tier list at the end, so you can go ahead and watch that. It's up here. Point with my left arm. So I'd recommend watching that one if you want to know more about skills. And for utility spells, I'd say just like be sure to read your spell list and think about, if I'm getting something that is just mediocre in my lower rank slots, could I instead replace it with something that is useless until it is incredible? Because if something is incredible out of your lower rank slots, you get to do an incredible thing and still have all your max rank slots for later in the adventuring day, so you can take more fights per day as a caster and not need to sleep every 3 encounters. But hey, that's my takes. This is just my quick idea of how I build a party. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment below, join my Discord, whatever. Videos are popping up on your screen. Go ahead and click them. I don't mind. Yeah. That's the video. That's it. I'll talk to y'all later.